You will hear in this evidence that this defendant, everything that she could.
Let me tell you something that's about to blow your mind. The people they got locked up for Foolio's murder, they about to walk free, and I got the inside scoop on exactly how they gonna beat this case. I'm talking about information that ain't hit the mainstream yet, prosecutorial misconduct that's about to get exposed, and evidence so weak it's embarrassing. Y'all remember when they arrested Alicia Andrews and them other cats for killing Foolio outside that Tampa hotel? The internet went crazy. Everybody thought it was a wrap, case closed. But here's what really happened. The prosecutors are playing dirty as hell, withholding evidence and building a case on lies and assumptions. This ain't justice, this is a witch hunt. I've been following this case from day one, and let me break it down for you. This is about to be a masterclass in how corrupt prosecutors try to railroad innocent people when they under pressure to solve a high-profile case. But good defense lawyers know how to expose that type of misconduct, and that's exactly what's about to happen. Foundation building, the real story. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to what really happened on June 23, 2024. Charles Jones, better known as Foolio, was celebrating his 26th birthday in Tampa when multiple shooters ambushed his car outside a hotel near USF campus at 4:40 a.m. But here's what the prosecutors don't want y'all to know. This wasn't some random gang hit. According to my sources close to the investigation, Foolio had been getting death threats for weeks leading up to his birthday. He knew something was coming, but he thought he was safe in Tampa, away from Jacksonville politics. The hit was planned with military precision. We talking about multiple vehicles, multiple shooters, brass catchers on the rifles to avoid leaving shell casings, and escape routes mapped out in advance. This level of coordination suggests professional killers, not some young girl from Jacksonville who never been in trouble before. Foolio was hit multiple times and died at the scene. His friends Xavier Edwards and Gino Norris were wounded but survived. The shooters fired over 100 rounds in less than 30 seconds, then disappeared into the night like ghosts. The escalation, building a case on lies. Now here's where it gets real interesting, and this is where the prosecutors started playing dirty. Within hours of the shooting, Tampa PD and the FBI were under massive pressure to solve this case. We talking about a celebrity murder with millions of social media followers demanding justice. So what did they do? They took the easy route and started looking at obvious suspects. People connected to Yungeen Ace and ATK who had been beefing with Foolio for years. But instead of doing real investigative work, they started building a case backwards from their assumptions. The first red flag was how quickly they focused on Alicia Andrews. This 21-year-old girl with no criminal history, no gang affiliations, no connection to the Jacksonville beef. But she was dating Isaiah Chance, who they suspected was involved, so they decided she must be guilty too. Here's where the prosecutors really showed their ass. They arrested Andrews and her boyfriend first, not because they had the strongest evidence against her, but because they thought she would be the easiest to flip. They figured a young girl facing life in prison would crack and give them information on the real shooters. But Andrews didn't crack. She maintained her innocence from day one, and her lawyers started exposing how weak the case really was. Prosecutorial misconduct exposed. What happened next shocked everyone who was paying attention to this case. The prosecutors started playing games that would make a mob lawyer blush. They withheld exculpatory evidence, leaked information to the media, and tried to poison the jury pool before the trial even started. First, they claimed to have surveillance footage showing Andrews at the scene of the crime. But when the defense demanded to see this footage, it turned out to be so grainy and distant that you couldn't identify anybody. The prosecutors knew this footage was worthless, but they kept claiming it was solid evidence. Second, they claimed to have cell phone data placing Andrews at the murder scene. But when independent experts analyzed this data, they found that the cell tower pings were consistent with Andrews being anywhere within a 3-mile radius of the hotel. That's not evidence, that's speculation. Third, they claimed to have witness testimony identifying Andrews as one of the shooters. But these witnesses were either friends of Foolio who had obvious motivations to lie, or people who were so intoxicated they couldn't remember basic details about what happened. The investigation, sloppy police work. The more you dig into this investigation, the more obvious it becomes that the police rushed to judgment and built their case around assumptions rather than evidence. They decided who they wanted to arrest and then looked for evidence to support that theory. Here's what really happened. The Tampa PD got a tip from Jacksonville Sheriff's Office that Isaiah Chance and Rashad Murphy might be involved in the shooting. Instead of investigating this tip properly, they immediately started surveillance on these individuals and everyone connected to them. When they saw that Andrews was dating Chance, they assumed she must be involved too. They didn't have any evidence against her specifically, but they figured guilt by association was good enough. That's not how the justice system is supposed to work. The FBI got involved and started using federal resources to build a RICO case, claiming this was part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. But RICO cases require proof of an ongoing organization engaged in criminal activity. A one-time murder, even if it was planned, doesn't meet that standard. The arrests rushing to judgment. On July 27, 2024, they arrested Isaiah Chance and Alicia Andrews at the same house in Jacksonville. The timing wasn't coincidental. They wanted to arrest them together to create the impression that they were co-conspirators, living together and planning crimes. But here's what the prosecutors didn't tell the media. Andrews wasn't even supposed to be at that house. She was just visiting when the arrest went down. She had her own apartment, her own life, her own job. She wasn't some criminal mastermind living with her gangster boyfriend. Over the next few weeks, they arrested Sean Gathright, Rashad Murphy, and Davian Murphy. But none of these arrests were based on solid evidence linking them to the actual shooting. It was all guilt by association and circumstantial evidence that could be interpreted multiple ways. The prosecutors held a big press conference announcing the arrests, claiming they had solved the case and brought justice for Foolio. But they knew their evidence was weak. That's why they tried the case in the media instead of focusing on building a solid legal case. The evidence, weaker than tissue paper. Let me break down the evidence the state claims to have and why it's about to get thrown out of court. First, they got surveillance footage from various locations around Tampa showing vehicles and individuals they claim are connected to the murder. But here's the problem. Most of this footage is from a distance at night with poor lighting. The defense brought in video enhancement experts who showed that positive identification from this footage is impossible. You literally cannot tell who these people are or what they're doing. Second, they got cell phone data showing certain individuals in the Tampa area around the time of the murder. But being in Tampa ain't illegal, and cell phone pings ain't precise enough to put someone at the exact location of the crime. The defense brought in telecommunications experts who explained how unreliable this type of evidence really is. Third, they got financial records showing that someone rented an Airbnb in Tampa around the time of the murder. But renting an Airbnb ain't evidence of murder conspiracy. People rent Airbnbs for legitimate reasons all the time. The prosecutors also claim to have evidence of planning and coordination, but they ain't released the specifics of that evidence. That tells me it's probably communications taken out of context or misinterpreted by investigators who were looking for evidence to support their predetermined conclusions. The social media warfare. Prosecutors playing dirty. Here's where the prosecutors really showed how desperate they are. When Andrews' lawyers posted a picture referencing Youngin Ace's Game Over diss track about Foolio, and Foolio's Instagram account, run by his mother, responded with a clown emoji, the prosecutors tried to use this as evidence of Andrews' guilt. They claimed this social media exchange showed that Andrews was taunting the victim's family and celebrating his death. But that's not what happened at all. Andrews' lawyers were making a legal point about the ongoing beef between different factions and how that beef created reasonable doubt about who actually killed Foolio. The prosecutors leaked this social media exchange to friendly media outlets, trying to make Andrews look heartless and guilty. But this type of prosecutorial misconduct is exactly what good defense lawyers know how to expose and use against the state. The legal strategy, exposing the corruption. Andrews' legal team ain't just defending their client. They're going on the offensive and exposing how corrupt this whole prosecution really is. They filed motions demanding all evidence, all communications between prosecutors and police, and all deals made with potential witnesses. What they found was shocking. The prosecutors had been coaching witnesses, withholding exculpatory evidence, and making deals with criminals in exchange for testimony against Andrews. This type of prosecutorial misconduct is grounds for dismissing the entire case. The defense also discovered that the lead detective on the case, Juan Ramos, had only been working homicides for 4 months when he got this case. This was his first major investigation, and he made rookie mistakes that contaminated the entire case. Ramos focused on Andrews because she was the easiest target, not because the evidence pointed to her. He ignored other potential suspects and leads that didn't fit his predetermined theory of the case. That's not police work, that's tunnel vision. The witness problems, criminals, and liars. The prosecution's witness situation is a complete disaster. Most of their witnesses are either criminals who made deals to avoid their own charges, or people who were so traumatized by witnessing the shooting that their memories are unreliable. One of their key witnesses is a convicted felon who was facing federal drug charges when he suddenly remembered seeing Andrews at the scene of the crime. Coincidentally, his federal charges got reduced right after he agreed to testify against Andrews. That ain't credible testimony. That's bought and paid for perjury. Another witness claims to have seen Andrews in one of the shooter vehicles, but this same witness initially told police he didn't see anything because it was too dark and chaotic. His story only changed after prosecutors offered him immunity from prosecution for his own crimes. The defense is going to tear these witnesses apart on cross-examination. They're going to expose their criminal histories, their deals with the prosecution, and their motivations to lie. By the time they're done, the jury ain't going to trust anything these witnesses say. The timeline problems, impossible logistics. One of the biggest problems with the prosecution's case is the timeline. They trying to show that Andrews and her co-defendants planned and executed this murder, but the logistics don't make sense. According to the prosecution's theory, Andrews traveled from Jacksonville to Tampa, participated in surveillance of Foolio, helped coordinate the attack, and then fled back to Jacksonville. But the timeline they're proposing is physically impossible given the distances involved and the evidence they have. The defense brought in logistics experts who showed that the prosecution's timeline requires Andrews to be in multiple places at the same time. Either the prosecutors are lying about the timeline, or they got the wrong person. The physical evidence problems, nothing there. In a case involving over 100 rounds fired by multiple shooters, you would expect to find DNA evidence, fingerprints, gunshot residue, or other physical evidence linking the defendants to the crime. But the prosecution don't have any of that. The shooters wore gloves and masks, used stolen vehicles, and were careful not to leave physical evidence behind. The brass catchers on the rifles meant no shell casings were left at the scene. This level of sophistication suggests professional killers, not some young girl from Jacksonville. Without physical evidence, the prosecution is relying entirely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. But circumstantial evidence can be interpreted multiple ways, and their witnesses have credibility problems that make their testimony worthless. The RICO problems, overcharging. The prosecution decided to charge this as a RICO case, claiming Andrews was part of an ongoing criminal enterprise. But RICO cases are extremely difficult to prove, especially when you're dealing with a one-time event rather than an ongoing pattern of criminal activity. To prove a RICO case, the prosecution has to show that Andrews was part of an organization that engaged in a pattern of racketeering activity. But Andrews had no criminal history, no gang affiliations, and no connection to any ongoing criminal enterprise. The defense is going to argue that the prosecutors overcharged this case because they wanted to use the threat of life in prison to force Andrews to plead guilty and testify against her co-defendants. That's prosecutorial misconduct, and it's grounds for dismissing the charges. The media manipulation, poisoning the jury pool. The prosecutors have been playing games with the media from day one, leaking information and holding press conferences to build public support for their case. But this strategy is backfiring because it's creating grounds for appeals based on prosecutorial misconduct. Every time the prosecutors leak information to the media, they're potentially poisoning the jury pool and making it impossible for Andrews to get a fair trial. The defense is documenting all of this media manipulation and using it to argue for dismissal of the charges. The prosecutors also tried to use social media posts and rap lyrics as evidence against Andrews, claiming they showed her involvement in gang activity. But the Supreme Court has ruled that rap lyrics and social media posts can't be used as evidence of criminal activity unless they're directly related to the specific crime charged. The appeals process, inevitable reversal. Even if the prosecution somehow gets a conviction at trial, this case is going to be reversed on appeal. There are so many constitutional violations and instances of prosecutorial misconduct that appellate courts are going to have no choice but to overturn any conviction. The defense has been documenting every violation, every instance of misconduct, and every constitutional problem with this case. They're building an appellate record that's going to make it impossible for any conviction to stand. The bigger picture: systemic corruption. This case is bigger than just Alicia Andrews or even Foolio's murder. This is about a corrupt system where prosecutors care more about their conviction rates and media attention than they do about actual justice. When prosecutors rush to judgment, withhold evidence, coach witnesses, and manipulate the media, they're not serving justice. They're serving their own careers. And when defense lawyers expose this type of misconduct, they're not just defending their clients, they're defending the Constitution. The inevitable outcome. Here's the bottom line, fam. This case is going to fall apart because it was built on lies, assumptions, and prosecutorial misconduct from the beginning. Alicia Andrews is going to walk free, not because she's innocent or guilty, but because the prosecutors can't prove their case without violating her constitutional rights. The real tragedy here ain't just that Foolio lost his life. It's that the people responsible might never be held accountable because the prosecutors were more interested in making headlines than building a solid case. When you rush to judgment, withhold evidence, and coach witnesses, you're not serving justice, you're serving your own ego. And that's exactly what happened in this case. Y'all gonna see this case fall apart piece by piece over the next few months. The evidence gonna get thrown out, the witnesses gonna get exposed as liars, and the defendant's gonna walk free. And when that happens, remember that you heard it here first. The prosecutors thought they could railroad a young black woman because she was dating someone they suspected of being involved in this murder. But good defense lawyers know how to expose that type of prosecutorial misconduct, and that's exactly what's happening here. This ain't about justice. This is about politics, publicity, and prosecutors trying to make names for themselves on a high-profile case. But the Constitution still matters, even in cases involving dead rappers and social media beef. What y'all think about this situation? Do you think the prosecutors are playing dirty, or do you think they got evidence we ain't seen yet? Let me know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be following this case all the way to the inevitable dismissal. This is just the beginning of what's going to be one of the biggest prosecutorial misconduct scandals in recent memory.